to be very, very good. I'm often asked about how I got involved in researching Sylvan Beach and United Lake history. It's kind of a fun story. 44 years ago, I was a senior at Hamilton College, and I was, of course, a history major. And the college at that time had a program called 4-1-4. You took 4 subjects each semester, and in January you took 1. And history majors were expected to design their own independent research project for that month. My family had always brought me to Sylvan Beach. When I was young, fishing to the Midway, etc., I knew that no books had been written about Sylvan Beach history, so I went up to Dr. David Ellis, who was my advisor, and I asked him if I could just go to Sylvan Beach for a month. He chuckled and said, "What for?" I said, "Well, I'd like to history in town." And that's not cool. That was a great experience. And his words were extremely prophetic and extremely true. On January 1st, 1972, my cousin dropped me off at a boarding house on 13th and Main Street, where I paid $12 a week for my room, shared a bathroom, etc. Absolutely loved it. And the next day, I went knocking on doors. Hi, I'm Jack Henke from Vienna College, writing a paper on Sylvan Beach history. Well, many people, dozens, scores of people. You figure I was kind of lucky because I was in a resort town, and people in a resort town have to be outgoing. I mean, if they aren't, then they have a very visible, morbid resort. So they welcomed me into their houses, and basically, several years after that, I published my first book, Sylvan Beach History, gone through 2 printings. In doing this, I love to fish, okay? And I spend many hours out there in the lake. In doing this, I noticed a map in the bait shops and in some of the homes in Sylvan Beach, which looks like a face. The original map was done in 1932 by Charles B. Grimes of Syracuse. He was an engineer. It's a fishing map of the United Lake. I used it for my end papers here. It was published by the Anglers Association of Onondaga. They gave me permission to do so. What struck me about this map, other than the incredible detail of it, Grimes did not have sonar. He did not have fish round finders. He had color-coded lines and measuring depths. He had compasses. And this thing was just so blazingly accurate. It's amazing. But what struck me was all the names of places around the United Lake. Lewis Point, North Bay, South Bay, Shackleton Shores, Norcross Point, Wilson Point, Messenger Bay, etc. Altogether, there are over 120 place names surrounding the United Lake. I thought it might be really cool if I were to find out, excuse me, how each of those names originated. And that became my next research project, which in 1987 culminated in this book, United Lake Place Names and History, in which I explain all of those items. Fascinating detective story. Some of them were very, very difficult. I'm fond of talking about Poddygut Shoals, P-O-D-D-Y-G-U-T. In Big Bay, in the west end of the lake, there's a Poddygut Shoals and a Poddygut Point. Strange name. The old-timers in Brewerton, which is the closest community to it, could only tell me that probably the fish pirates, illegal fishermen that thrived in this area up to the 1950s, gave it that name. But they had no idea where it came from. I talked with Millard and Chuck Rogers, who ran the bait shop. Great guys, amateur historians, accurate persons. They had no idea. Well, in 1986, I took a day off from school because I wanted to meet with some people in Constantia. It was one of my knock-on-doors research days. I'd go to one person's house, interview them, and then ask if there was somebody else I should see. They'd send me to someone else, someone else, someone else. Altogether, I talked to about 20 people that day. Pardon me. The last people I talked to, Mr. and Mrs. Melvin Dunham, very, very hospitable people, invited me in for coffee. Mel and I were sitting in the front room, and Mrs. Dunham was making the coffee, getting the donuts ready. And I mentioned to Mel the fact that I could not find the origin of Padigat. And I was speaking loudly, like I have a tendency to do, and Mrs. Dunham started laughing hysterically. I said, whoa, you know, am I cracking jokes? She walked out and said, Jack, my father, he was a fish pirate. He fished that area. What's the shape of Padigat Bay? I said, it's like this. What are Padigat shoals like? Well, they're little humps, like so, on the bottom. A Padigat, around 1910, was slang for a beer garden. Thus, Padigat shoals, Padigat Bay. It's fun to do history. It's fun to do the research. Today, it would be relatively easy to do this, except for the fact that you couldn't talk to the old timers. Today, we have the web. And the web has proved to be a very fertile ground for historical research, even local history research. One website that I use probably 20 times a week at the New Hartford Library is FultonHistory.com. Tom Tryfinski has put this site together, and he is an absolute saint. He has rephotographed, digitized, over 32 million pages of upstate New York newspapers. And he's developed a search engine whereby you can search those papers for anything. I've used them to search families. I've used them for additional research into Oneida Lake. I've used them for work in the church that I've been researching, Zion Lutheran Church in New Hartford. Some work that I do through the library. It's incredible. If any of you are into computers, get into that, FultonHistory.com. You will find amazing things. For example, I will be showing you a picture of Martin Cavanaugh, who was the leader of Sylvan Beach in the 1890s through the 1920s. If you type in Martin Cavanaugh and Sylvan Beach, that's what's known as a Boolean search, this and that, into the search box. Hit the drop-down menu for Boolean and then hit search. You'll get something like 250 newspapers with articles that mention Martin Cavanaugh. Boom, just like that. When I did this book, I used to go to microfilm machines and go through paper after paper after paper looking for a clue. The web's revolutionized things. When I was doing this, I encountered many stories of Oneida Lake. And 5 years after I did that book, I published this one, Tales of Oneida Lake, a collection of stories about it. 10 years after I did that one, I collected more stories, written a few essays about Oneida Lake history, and I published my last one, 2004, From the Beach to Brewerton. There will be one more. I've been working on it for 12 years. I have an awful lot of material. It's time to put it all together. I've written about 60% of it. But there's a lot to do. But it will be fun. Okay. Excuse me for 1 second. Today, I'm going to take you on a journey, a wonderful journey, through Sylvan Beach 116 years ago, in the heart of the Cavanaugh era, where people called this the Coney Island of Central New York, an inland Coney Island with 4 miles of the best bathing beach in the world. We're going to look at some of the images from that time. We're going to look at some of the reasoning why some of these images happened. And hopefully you can enjoy history in part as I have. You can't understand a community's history until you understand the geography of that community. You just can't. Okay? Geography gives us our economy. Geography gives us the way we live. Geography is ultra important. And Sylvan Beach is that way. Whether it be the sun rises, okay, over the east shore, the sun sets, like we're going to experience right here. Pardon me. Whether it be the great power of the lake, which you can see out there today. Awesome power and glory in the waves of Oneida Lake. A power that's been big throughout history. This is a picture of the lake. 1912, raging. Obviously, floodwaters were occurring. Okay, the lake was high, the big waves were coming in. It's always been a lake to be respected, not feared, but respected. In winter or in spring, that power can produce different images. Excuse me. Around 1910, the ice broke up in the lake, and it chunked. It broke up into small pieces. We had some strong west winds. It blew it in, and it just keeps coming. And it piled up. And it snapped telephone poles, it obliterated houses, and did many things. I mentioned Dr. Kavanaugh, Martin Kavanaugh. The nurses at his sanitarium took pictures, and I acquired about 20 of these pictures. And they're incredibly cool, just to show the power of another lake. Geography, importance. You had a beach, a big beach, much bigger than it is today, much bigger. You didn't have a pier down here that blocks the sand that's being pushed in from Fish Creek that would enrich the beach, okay? And you can see 4 miles, 5 miles of the biggest, finest beach in the world is Sylvan Beach. You can see the trees in the background. Sylvan comes from the Latin sylvanus, meaning wooded. The wooded beach attracted people. Once people got in the late 1800s to vacation, people got more prosperous. This became a very attractive place. It had its boardwalk. Okay, this is obviously a windy day. You can see one hat flying through the air right there. Geographically speaking, I like this slide quite a bit. If you look out the lake, you can see some green on the sand. There was weeds in the lake. There was algae in the lake back through the 1600s, when the French called it La Lac Vert, the green lake. In the 1800s, the boatmen would not drink the water because they would get lake fever from the lake velocity. Okay, it's a very, very natural phenomenon. It gets accelerated by us, but it's always been there. You can see some of that along the shore. The boardwalk, by the way, went from roughly Bellevue Cafe up to 16th Avenue. Algae, ugly stuff. Person. The reason Oneida Lake is productive is because it's rich in what we call, one second. It's rich at the bottom of the food chain. A food chain, biologically speaking, shows who eats what and who eats who. Okay, it's an ecological term. At the bottom are the plants. That's the algae. Okay, which are eaten by the minnows, eaten by the bugs, which are eaten the minnows, eaten by the insects, the bugs. Any of you recognize these insects? Some of you might. I'm going to give you eel flies. Right, okay? Eel flies are about yay big. They were mayflies. In July, they hatched in the bottom of the lake. And basically, they flew up by the billions, They were so thick that Eddie Stewart, old Eddie, God bless his beautiful soul, when he and Fifi first rented Walter Ritchie's hot dog stand over here in the park, the first two things they did was buy snow shovels, okay, to shovel the eel flies off the walk, and the second thing was to screen in the porch, because it was just terrible. But it wasn't terrible when it came to the productivity of the lake. Because when you had the algae, when you had the bugs, when you had the minnows, you'd have this, the walleyes. And the walleyes brought the fishermen, brought tens of thousands of fishermen every year to the lake to savor the excellent angling here. Geographically speaking, the lake's location was extremely important. Try to imagine a road map of New York State. Now, get rid of the roads. The year is 1700. To go from Albany to Oswego, you'd go up the Mohawk, making a few portages, carrying your boats. You'd go as far as Rome, and you could carry your boats 1 mile on the Great Carrier. You'd put them in Wood Creek. This is Wood Creek up by the Coast Guard place. Up on the canal here. Head Wood Creek down into Fish Creek, down into Oneida Lake, out the Oneida River, the 3 rivers, up the Oswego River, and you'd be at the Great Lakes. Before the Erie Canal, this was the way to get across Oneida Lake. This was New York State, excuse me. Tens of thousands of people came across through this route, and they saw the resources here. They saw the beach. They saw the fish. Francis Edwin van der Tonk, a Dutchman, who worked as an engineer planning some of the Erie Canal for DeWitt Clinton. He wrote in his diaries in 1793, he lived on the North Shore near Constantia at that time, he wrote of the amazing abundance of fish. He said there's nothing in the European rivers that can match what's in Oneida Lake. You get writings like that, and it attracts people, again, because of the geography. This route that I described to you was important. New York was, of course, a British colony, but the French were in Canada. And a series of wars called the French and Indian Wars were fought in the 1750s. The Brits thought it was so important to protect the route that they built forts. You're all familiar with Fort Stanwix, okay, in Rome. Some of you might be familiar with the site of Fort Brewer, okay, on the west end of the lake, certainly Fort Oswego. This was part of a chain of forts protecting this route. Sylvan Beach had a fort like that. It's a small fort, garrisoned by about 24 soldiers. It was called the Royal Blockhouse. All of you have seen where it is. Go out to Main Street and go towards Verona Beach. Cross the bridge on the right-hand side, you will see a state historic marker that says Royal Blockhouse, built in 1759, 60 rods, 360 feet east of the marker. That's where it was. Okay? This is a model of it that used to be kept in the Fort Brewerton Museum. The Fort Brewerton Historical Society, by the way, has a wondrous museum. And if you call them up, they give tours. And they have one of the greatest collections of Oneida Lake memorabilia, photos, etc., that you could find. Okay? The Cleveland Historical Society has another small, extremely fine museum of Oneida Lake paraphernalia or what have you. Okay. It was time to settle Sylvan Beach. This guy was the one that pretty much started the ball rolling. His name was James D. Spencer. He and his family donated this in 1887. He was from West Monroe. He and his sons in the 1840s, 1850s, 1860s basically bought up all the lands through here. Most of them, I shouldn't say all. You know, on the lakefront and Sylvan were on the beaches. In the 1870s, they started selling it, and basically a new resort, or retreat as it was called then, because it was kind of small, came out because of it. The Spencers, this is tough to see, built this hotel, Lyman Spencer in particular. Many of you have seen this. This was the Forest Hotel. It used to be down by the bridge here, where the Crazy Clam is today. This was built in 1879. They had a little bar on the left-hand side of Main Street, just as you're going towards the bridge, called the Spencer Brothers Cafe. They had picnic groves in the park. They even started the east shore of the Oneida Lake Oil Company. They didn't find any oil, but they got an awful lot of mud. Basically, they were entrepreneurs, American capitalists taking advantage of people's desire to have vacations in the middle and latter 1800s. This was one of the groves, one of the picnic groves. in the park at Sylvan Beach. Lots of people will just bring a picnic lunch. They want to train up here. You got to sit at the table, get your beverages, from the dispensers. Very profitable. This early Sylvan Beach started to grow in the 1880s. The first really big hotel was the Algonquin Hotel, and you can see it here. It was built in 1884 by Sylvan Beach Lake Oneida. To give you an idea of where this was, it's roughly where the Canal View restaurant is today. That'll give you an idea. And we're looking out towards where there's no pier, a point, the beach, etc. Note the steamboats. Almost every big hotel had a steamboat. Also had, this was extremely important, a fleet of maybe 10, 15, 20 heavy wooden rowboats. Those were the United Lake fishing boats. They were made by companies around the lake. The Davies over in Bridgeport, nearing Emmons, earlier than nearing Emmons, the Miltons in Brewerton. They had hundreds of boats for use on the lake. The old saying was, no one ever died in a David boat. Obviously, they didn't die in the boat. They had to fall out of it. But it was an interesting advertisement anyway. The firm of Saturn and Garvin that owned the Algonquin, you can see the hotel to the left, created this wonderful group of pictures on a poster, which I re-photographed years and years ago. I always like this picture here because it shows a lot of the early names of Sylvan Beach. Sylvan Beach wasn't officially named Sylvan Beach until 1886, and that's when the railroad named the station Sylvan Beach Station. It was often called Beacon Beach because the United Native Americans supposedly had beacons, flares, bonfires along the beach to guide their fishermen. It was called Fish Creek and Wood River for the bodies of water. It was called Sylvan Beach. It was called Spencer's Beach. It had many, many names. No wonder people just called it the beach. A lot easier. No Main Street, okay? Main Street was just a dirt road then. Eventually, though, Main Street became Railroad Avenue when the Ontario and Western Railroad built their trains right now. First bridge, built 1886. In the background, you can just see on the right-hand side is the Forest Home. This is roughly a little bit to the west of the existing bridge. To the east of there, going up the creek, were many, many back sets of what was called Wood River. Wood River was formed when Wood Creek and Fish Creek merged roughly a mile or so to the east of Sylvan Beach here, and it meandered down through. If you're on top of the bridge and you look up into Snug Harbor, I think it's called Snug Harbor, that was the old Wood River, okay? If you go over, I still call it Skinner's Harbor, by Skinner's Harbor and Holmes's Harbor, Holmes's Marine, those were part of the old Wood River. They became isolated when the barge canal was put in 1917 because you had this meandering river and the canal was put in and boom, it cut through. And the current was through the canal, and thus you had those. This was an early ferry boat. Before the bridge was built in 1886, there were 7 or 8 ferries that went right across the Wood River to take people from the Verona Beach side, where the Lehigh Valley Railroad dropped them off over to Sylvan Beach. Okay, water break. I tell you, if I did this every day, I'd weigh 150. That might be good, really. This was Martin Kavanaugh. He was a physician. He had a small hospital in Oneida. Very ambitious guy, hard-working guy. In 1891, he built the Kavanaugh Sanitarium in Sylvan Beach. It stands today. I believe it's called the Oneida. It is at the corner of 13th Ave and Park Ave.